Texas, the place many consider to be the most die-hard football state in the country. High school teams have college stadiums, and everyone is watching football all weekend. So why would a football team ever leave the bastion of football? The Houston Oilers played in Houston from 1960 to 1997 and decided to up and relocate to become the Tennessee Titans at the end of their run. But why exactly did the Oilers choose to leave Houston? I'm Jake with FootballLore, and today we'll be exploring just why the Oilers left the Houston area. In order to get a better understanding of the Oilers' history, we need to go back to their origin. The team got its start as a charter member of the AFL. The AFL was a startup rival to the NFL at the time, and the Oilers were owned by Bud Adams, who had made his wealth in the oil fields by Houston. He had made several bids to try to acquire an NFL team that didn't go through, so when he had a chance to be one of the original 8 owners in the AFL, he jumped on the opportunity. Throughout the 60s, they were pretty popular in the Houston area, and also had been one of the few teams to be able to steal talent from the NFL with their draft. They were paying high salaries and helped to make things more competitive with the NFL. They were able to make the first 3 straight AFL championship games, and even won the first 2 AFL championships against the Chargers both times. They were so prolific, they became the first AFL team to sign an active NFL player when they signed Willard Duville from the Bears. The Oilers had huge popularity in Houston, and in 1967, they became the first ever football team to play inside a domed stadium when they played in the Astrodome. Once the NFL-AFL merger became official, the Oilers found themselves sinking to the bottom of the standings at the end of every season. This drop in performance did not help them gain popularity in the city of Houston at the time. The early 70s was awful, but the late 70s saw them appear in an AFC championship game and had Earl Campbell on their roster, which was a huge draw with the local Houston crowds. They had back-to-back AFC championship appearances, and while they lost both times, competing for a Super Bowl did wonders for the franchise's value. They were even able to pack the Astrodome for rallies at the end of the season, which meant their fan support was able to sell out a stadium even when they weren't playing a game. While the owner of the team didn't really need the NFL money because he was independently wealthy, anyone would want a few extra $1 million to throw around. Plus, it was cool to be turned into somewhat of a celebrity for owning the team. The 80s was another solid decade for the Oilers, and it saw legends like Warren Moon grace the field for the team. They still had solid support, but in 1987, Adams threatened to move the team to Jacksonville unless the Astrodome was brought up to date to match other NFL stadiums. The Astrodome had become one of the smallest venues in the NFL, and it did need desperate improvements to its structure. The city did not want to lose the Oilers, and invested $67 million into renovations to bring it up to Bud Adams standards. The city really did not want the Oilers to relocate, and while usually negotiations are tense, they did acquiesce to the demands of the team pretty quickly. They didn't want to risk ending up like Baltimore without an NFL franchise. This renovation added 10,000 seats, AstroTurf, and 65 luxury boxes. These were funded by increased property taxes and hotel taxes, alongside bonds that would be repaid over 30 years. Bud Adams demanding to use taxpayer funds to pay for these renovations didn't sit well with many in Houston, and it was the beginning of the end when it came to relations between the city and the team. I mean, think about it. You live in Houston in a house, and your property taxes go up $1,000 a year to help pay for a rich man's stadium improvements. Obviously, that isn't going to go over well when you're struggling to make it paycheck to paycheck while he wants to buy another yacht. It was very unpopular amongst the population of Houston as a whole, understandably. The 90s did see continued solid play on the field from the franchise, and in 1993 they had a 12-4 record, which was the best the team had ever done in Texas. This season was not the smoothest, and at one point the offensive and defensive coordinators literally got into a brawl during the middle of a game. However, in that offseason they traded Warren Moon to the Vikings, and this totally crippled the ability of the team to perform in any capacity. They went 2-14 the next season, and with their high draft pick, took Steve McNair to replace Moon at quarterback. While all of this was happening on the field, tensions were ramping up off the field. The city of Houston and Adams had a tense relationship since the demand for improvements years ago, but now it was something different. Adams once again came to the city and asked this time for a new stadium. The improvements had been nice, but really a new stadium would be much better for the team and himself. He proposed a brand new facility, and even was willing to contribute 25% of the total cost of the project from his personal bank account. He also was willing willing to use this venue as something that could be converted to a domed NBA stadium for the Houston Rockets alongside a venue for the football team. The mayor at first was very supportive of the idea and thought it would be a great way to revitalize downtown and boost traffic to local businesses. Games would bring crowds downtown that would spend at bars and restaurants before and after. However, the mayor knew it was going to be unpopular when it came to a vote and refused to announce his public support for the project, even though the population of Houston really did not want to lose the Oilers. The tax raises previously had been very unpopular and few wanted a more severe hike to pay for a new stadium, especially because those investments had been so recent. Few understood why they would commit to build a new stadium so shortly after they had just spent tens of millions on their current home. This was an understandable position from the people of Houston, but as we know, NFL owners hate being told no when it comes to a new stadium. Almost every other relocation spurs from a similar discussion of them wanting a new stadium without needing to foot the bill. Adams felt the lack of public support alongside the oil crash of the 80s that decimated the Houston economy meant it was very unlikely for him to get the stadium he wanted. He started to shop the Oilers to other markets to see what offers could come back. Several cities had applied to become the home of the team, but he was most interested in the market of Nashville, which loved football but did not currently have a team representing them. This, alongside it being a quickly growing city, made it interesting to Adams, and he began secret negotiations with the mayor to discuss the terms of a potential relocation. The city promised to give Adams $144 million towards a new stadium and $70 million in ticket revenue. This was much better than the lack of an offer he had gotten from Houston. From a purely business perspective, it made more sense for him to move the team, so he did. After the negotiations were finalized, he announced he was going to be moving the team at the end of the next season, and as a result, almost all support for the Oilers in Houston dried up instantly. The 1996 season was a disaster from a fan support perspective, with most games not even selling to 50% capacity as a result of the move. The city of Houston felt betrayed after they had caved to the demands of the owner the first time, just to have him still move the team years later. They felt as though their loyal support had meant absolutely nothing to the ownership, and since they were so passionate about football, they were also upset they would be losing their representation in the NFL. However, they weren't going to bend over to the whims of one rich man who wanted to dictate the spending of the city. Their final game attracted a crowd of just 15,000 people, and it was the smallest crowd the franchise had ever drawn in its entire stay in Houston. They ended up moving shortly after this to their new stadium in Nashville. Nissan Stadium at the time was a brand new facility just by downtown Nashville. They had immediate success in Tennessee with an appearance in Super Bowl 34 under the guidance of Steve McNair. While this success was sweet, it was short-lived before they went on to have a pretty mediocre existence in the years since. While Nashville was obviously thrilled to have an NFL team and has shown a lot of support, it did leave a big hole in the state of Texas. They are one of the most populated states, and only having one team was crazy from a market perspective. The Oilers ended up moving mainly because their demands for a new stadium were not met. I will say, while Adams was only willing to put up 25% of the cost, most owners aren't willing to put any of their own money into the project. I understand why the city of Houston was apprehensive, and I understand why they weren't willing to have their taxes raised just to pay for a new stadium shortly after improvements. However, the second they said no to this, it was in Adams' best interest to relocate the team to a new location willing to build him a new state-of-the-art stadium. The Oilers had a lot of history, and it does suck they lost it, but the Texans at this point are as good as the Oilers ever were. The state of Texas at this point had just one NFL team, and the city was clamoring for another chance to have an NFL team. Houston is an absolutely massive market, and while the Cowboys are huge, the NFL knew it was important to have a team in the market. In 1999, Robert McNair was sold a franchise in the Houston area for $1 billion. He had made his wealth in the oil business the way most of the super wealthy in Houston have, and went on to open a private investment fund that was doing incredibly well at the time of his purchase. The team would begin playing in the 2002 year in their brand new stadium. This is pretty amusing considering they refused to pay for it if it was going to be owned by Bud Adams. The city of Houston rallied to afford the new NRG Stadium in Houston, located next door to the Astrodome. This new stadium was state-of-the-art at the time. In 2002, it cost $352 million to build and has a seating capacity of almost 75,000. It was actually the first NFL facility to have a retractable roof and has hosted the Super Bowl twice. They purposely wanted to design a stadium that pushed the limits at the time, and they got a product that certainly still looks pretty modern even though it is over 20 years old at the time of this recording. It has had one set of modernizations in 2015, but will probably be the home of the Texans for years to come. It did take quite a long time for the Texans to figure it out. While the beginning of their franchise was incredibly rough, they did have several great seasons with Matt Schaub, before having a bright spurt with Deshaun Watson, and now a very promising future with CJ Stroud. The city of Houston is way too passionate about football to not have a team, and I don't think there are any markets worth relocating to other than Houston that don't already have an NFL team. Thankfully, the Texans are safe in the city of Houston, especially because they're willing to spend on stadium renovations, and that is the most important to keeping your team in your city. They are the youngest franchise in the NFL, so they might need a bit more time to work out the kinks, but overall, I think they are well on their way to actually competing for Super Bowls on a regular basis. The Texans are also now the 11th most valuable team in the NFL, which is impressive considering how much younger they are than most of the teams in the league. That is why the Houston Oilers relocated, because they wouldn't build a new stadium when asked by the owner. That is how it usually shakes out in these situations, unfortunately. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to press the like button and comment down below. We post 2 videos like this a week, and would love your support as we try to hit 10,000 subscribers this year. Our last video was about how the Colts wasted the potential of Andrew Luck, and you should check it out. Thank you so much for watching.